My name is Edgar James Moss, and I was born and reared in the mountains of Harlan County, southeastern Kentucky, Benham, Kentucky in particular. I now live in Newington, Connecticut. I previously lived in New Haven, Connecticut before moving on to Newington. And I've lived in Newington, Connecticut now for approximately 6 years. I attend East Benham High School, and at that time, the first elementary school, grades 1 through 6, were on the first floor of the building. Grades 7 through 12 were on the second floor of the building. And as I said, I was born and reared in Benham, and I attended the East Benham School under the principalship of Mr. Joseph Alexander Matthews and his wife, Mrs. Ruth Matthews. And I am one of 13 children born to my parents, Mr. and Mrs. Green and Ina Moss, who were both born in Alabama. My father was born in Mosses, Alabama. Mosses, Alabama is a community, a very small community, approximately 3,000 people right now, that sits on 4.8 square miles of land outside of Hayneville, Alabama. 4 of my distant cousins, after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, and former slaves, blacks, former slaves, could then purchase and own land, and 4 of those guys pooled their resources, their money, to buy this 4.8 square miles of land. And this is what Mosses, Alabama now sits on. This is where, this is Mosses, Alabama. I left there, I was there again in the month of July. I spent approximately 3 days there in July. And I needed to launder some clothing. And I went to a dollar store in Hayneville, Alabama, to purchase some detergent and bleach. And the young lady who sold me the bleach and the detergent is a second cousin. So that was a rather emotional experience, another emotional experience. Yeah. So I've been to Mosses several times. Brand. And my mom, her parents and grandparents came out of Brent, Alabama, where their great grandfather, a former slave, was first bought in Charleston, South Carolina. He was then sold to a slave owner in Alexandria, Virginia. And from Alexandria, Virginia, and dreadfully, he was sold to a slave owner in Brent, Alabama. And that's where my mother's family comes from, Brent, Alabama. He was sold down the river, so to speak. And slaves they knew that they did not want to be sold. They had no control over it, but they did know that they did not want to be sold into the deep South, where times were considered supposed to be harder for them. I got to meet my great-grandmother on my mother's side of the family. I was never told what her name was. I was approximately 5 years young when my mom took my baby sister Nancy and I to Alabama. And I got to meet my great grandmother and my grandmother at that time. And my grandmother, my great grandmother, we called her Big Mama. That's as much as I can recall about her name and who she was. And it was not like today where children can go see both grandmom, granddad, and great grandfather and great grandmother, and all, within just a few miles of one another. But that's what that was like. And I was approximately 5 years young because I had not started school. Oh, I remember the very first day. And my very first teacher, her name was Mrs. Becker. And Mrs. Becker was, she was a very dark complected woman with gold horn rim eyeglasses. And she had protruding teeth, but beautiful gray white hair. And Mrs. Becker took no prisoners. She took no no's for no answers from nobody. She was Mrs. Becker. And after graduating high school and going back home, I did have the opportunity to see her before she transitioned to the spirit world. Mrs. Becker, in particular, I was able to share with her how where I lived and some of the things that I had experienced in life, and was able to thank her for for the discipline that she started in me. And I remember the very first day at school, I went home and I asked my mom if I had to go back to school the next day. And she said yes. And I pondered that question and I asked her, do I have to go to school the following day? And she said yes. And I asked her, I said, well, how long do I have to go to school? And when she said 12 years, I could not fathom 12 years, all right? Now, I was so accustomed to running around, playing barefooted, and just enjoying being alive, just enjoying being a kid. So I had no concept of what 12 years would be like. I could not measure that. But also as a child, I remember my oldest brother, Lester, we called him Bruh. I remember the day that it was during the Korean conflict. No, World War II. World War II. He went, I remember the day that he left going into the Army. I wanted to go with him so bad. I just wanted to go with Bruh so bad. I cried. And when he got on the bus across the road from the house, number 44, Main Street in Benham, where we lived, and he took off on the bus. And I wanted to go with him so badly. I crossed the road against my parents' wishes, and I was standing waiting for the bus to come. I was barefooted. I had on one piece of clothing, and that was a pair of short pants. And that's what I had on when I wanted to go with my brother Lester to the Army. Well, he came back home and he worked in the coal mines. No, he went to Western Kentucky State College, Western Kentucky State College in Paducah was an all-black school. It was only for black students, and that's where he graduated from. And he met his wife, Nanny Louise Hightower, there. And she's the woman the lady that he married. He came back and worked in the coal mines. Even though he had a college degree, he could not find a job. So he came back and he worked in the coal mines. I was, that started, well, I was one of the 4 boys in my family. And my 3 older brothers, Lester, Cornell, and Odell, they all played football. And I was in the 6th grade, and I wanted to play football for some reason. And with my dad, it was a discussion as to whether he was going to let me play or not. And I was so little, as I reflect. And he did not immediately want me to play. And that was a struggle between he and I. And he told me not to go near that football field. And after getting out of school, wanting to play football so bad that the field house, the Tog House, was right next to the school where Mr. and Mrs. J.P. Polk and their family lived. And after they moved out, it became the field house for the football team. And also served as a wood shop, industrial arts thing. So that's how I got onto the football team. And I was on the football team for 7 years, my 6th grade right through high school. And I surmise I'm the only student that played football at East Benham High School that was on the team or affiliated or associated with the football team for 7 years. So going into junior high school, it was a different approach to the elementary years. And I just began to bloom and blossom in high school. I learned to do so many things. For instance, I learned how to mop a floor. I was taught how to mop a floor by Professor Joseph Alexander Matthews. You didn't push the mop back and forth. You would go side to side, and you would back up as you're doing it. And that was one of the experiences that I had in high school, that I recall in high school. And also, I forget what it was. I did something, and Professor Matthews was going to kick me out of school. And I knew that would not go over with Mr. Green Moss. So I begged and I pleaded with Fess, everybody called him Fess, not to kick me out of school. So every window in our school, I had to wash those windows inside and out to keep from being kicked out of school. And that's one of those moments that, yeah. After graduating high school, I stopped in Louisville, Kentucky with my brother Cornell and his wife, Mattie Bell, and their daughter, Yolanda. And I worked there as a gardener and a chauffeur. I had a driver's license, so I got the job as uh, a gardener and a chauffeur for the heir to the corn manufacturing, cabinet manufacturing company out of Sumter, South Carolina. Yeah, that's what I did. It was my very first job. Yes, I met with two of my teachers, Mr. Charles Price and Mr. Emmett Broaders. They were both from Louisville. And holidays and some weekends, they would go back and forth. Yes, there was. There were. I I recall this young man who he had been locked up. He'd been in prison, and he came. And this was during the time that I was working, and so it was one weekend. I was up on the park at Jackson Street, and with guys just playing basketball and enjoying themselves. So he came over to me knowing that I was a new guy on the block. And he said, "Give me a quarter." I said, "Okay, this is what I thought was going to eventually happen." And when it did, I told him, I says, "I don't have no money." He said, "You work every day. What do you do with your money?" I pulled my little bank book out. I handed it to him. And he looked at it and he couldn't read it. So that shut that down. And the next thing, we were playing basketball, and he and I both went up for a rebound. And I knew that if he got that rebound, that this saga was going to continue. And I made sure that that was not going to happen. So I was a lanky fellow, but he was a stocky, big built guy. So I hit him with my body, and I grabbed that rebound, and he said, "The MF is strong too." So, and I knew then that my issues with him were going to be over. Yeah. So that was one of those incidents there. I joined the Air Force in January 1960. All Air Force boot camp, initially boot camp was at Lackland Air Force Base. I want to share with you, there were, of my parents' 13 children, only 11 of us lived. 2 of us died prematurely. So that left 11 children. All 11 living children of my mother and father, Mr. and Mrs. Green and Ina Moss, graduated from East Benham High School, the colored school in Benham, Kentucky. We all graduated under the principalship of Mr. and Mrs. Joseph and Ruth Alexander Matthews. 7 of the 11 of us went to college. 5 of the 7 that went to college graduated. 2 of the 5 that graduated did some postgraduate study. And one of us has 2 associate degrees, 3 master's degrees, and a PhD. And I am blessed to be that person, that one, of the 11 children that live of my mother and father to graduate high school and college and go on and do some postgraduate study. One year, almost 1 year at Jefferson City, Missouri, at where in the second semester, I had to leave because my father became ill. And I went back home to help my mom take care of my daddy. And we did that. I did that, and after I got back, after Dad got back up where he could, Mom he could do for himself, and Mom could help. I had not worked, and my daddy gave me bus fare from Barberville, Kentucky, to Louisville, Kentucky, when I joined the Air Force. Yeah. And that was at Lincoln University at Jefferson City, Missouri. So when my first hitch with the Air Force, I was first discharged in January 1964. And I was out of the touch with the military for 11 years, and then I went back. And after that, during that time, I was living in New Haven, Connecticut, and going to school back and forth, part-time, full-time, Southern Connecticut State College, which became Southern Connecticut State University, and then the University of New Haven, where I graduated in '76. And I gathered 2 associate degrees from what is now Gateway Technical Community College, and initially it was called South Central Community College. From the University of New Haven, bachelor's degree, and 2 associate degrees from Gateway Technical Community College, and there's a master's degree from Southern Connecticut State University, and then there's the master's and the doctorate, Tabernacle Bible College and Seminary out of Tampa, Florida. History, sociology, psychology, and that's pretty much what I worked with in the New Haven school system, as well as working with other school systems as a substitute teacher here and there. I re-enlisted in the military, and I completed a total of 30 years of military service. After leaving the military, I taught for 10 years at New Haven Board of Education, and I sold insurance after that for 15 years. And I then retired from the insurance business, and as well as the teaching environment. And I also did some consultation with one of the youth programs, after school programs in New Haven, and I did a lot of that community type work. I did, and it was being disciplined, being having to know what I was taught how to do things, and Uncle Sam did a lot of that, that discipline. And when it came to setting up programs and lesson plans and so forth, and working with the students And I found that once I allow the students to know what I desired for them to do, and I would make sure that they did what I requested of them, they would fall in line. And that was really a rewarding experience. And all of the things that I learned in the classroom as about human behavior, the sociology of life, and the psychological things that we as human beings do, at human behavior, the emotional, psychological, all of that combined, I was able to employ that. And that was one of the things that really gave me the basis and the strength to do the things that I did. Well, one of the things, the life in Benham, Kentucky, my life in Benham, Kentucky, and how that impacts me, and what it has given me, the foundation for today. The discipline and respect, and my religious education began when I was a child, and if I did not go to Sunday school in church on Sunday, I could not get up and go out and do all the things in Sunday afternoon that the other kids did. So there was that process was in place. My mom saw to that, and I'm grateful that she did. And one of the other things about growing up in Benham, it was a segregated community. And we black folk lived in the eastern part of Benham, just south of Lynch. And what separated Benham from Lynch was a canal, a ditch. And we talk about that and we joke about that ditch even today with one another. And because that was the beginning of Benham. And the beginning of Benham took on what was called New Benham. And there's just a very few houses of that in the eastern part of Benham. But we grew up in a segregated community where my father worked for the International Harvester Coal Mining Company. And with that having been said, everything that was dirty was in the black community. The coal mines on the mountainsides, on the North Mountain side, as well as the South Mountain side, were in Benham. The coal dump, where they pile coal up, and sometimes 3 and 4, 5 stories high, was in the black community, where the coal cars were repaired and made all of the noise and the dust and the dirt, was in the black community. The bathhouses, there were 2 bathhouses, one for whites and one for the blacks. And the one for the blacks had 2 sides. One side was for whites, and then the other side was for the blacks. But in the same building, all right? But yet, my father worked in the coal mine with the white coal miners, and when he came from the coal mines, he went to the left to go home, and they would go to the right to go home. And that's how that system, that environment was set up. the water filtration plant, the water storage plant, the electrical plant was all in the black community. When coal was loaded into the coal cars, the gondolas, to be shipped out, all of that was in the black community. The clean facilities in Benham were in the white community, such as the company store. We had, and that was another situation. And when I was approximately 4 years old, I remember being in the meat market with my mother. And every time that a white person would come into the store, my mother was pushed back from being served. And she was not waited on until there were no white people in the store to buy meat. So, and I asked her, I said, Mama, how much longer are we going to be here? Why do we, and my little feet and legs getting tired. So she told me that she had to wait her turn. And her turn did not come until after all of the white people in the store had been waited on. There was a theater, and the Isaac family owned the theaters in Cumberland, Benham, and Lynch. Now, blacks could not go to the Isaac Theater in Cumberland, Kentucky. We could go to the theater in Benham, Kentucky, and we could go to the theater in Lynch, Kentucky. Of those three, we could go to watch movies in two, but not all three. And the clean facilities of Benham, such as the baseball diamond and the football field, were in the white community. Yes, we had access to them. But we never, with the football field, the white school, they would practice primarily on the eastern half of the field, just as you come into the gate to the school. To the football field. And we practice on the far end of the football field. Now, both schools are practicing football on the same field at the same time, but never interacted or practiced with or against one another. Okay? Now, when you look at the configuration of Benham, Benham was not, it was not as a large a town as Lynch or Cumberland. And in order to go to Cumberland, people from Lynch had to drive through Benham to get to Cumberland, where most of the stores and those kind of businesses were that were available to us. And looking at the coal mining situation, and see, the International Harvester Company owned the big store, the department store in Benham, and they owned the meat market in Benham. And many times where I'm going with this is the who is that? Tennessee Ernie Ford sang the song, I Owe My Soul to the company store. My daddy did. There were times that my daddy needed to do things, buy things, for his family. And the manager of the store in Benham would not allow my daddy to add things to his charge account. There were 11 children. So, and they were taking money from his paycheck every week, but they still would not allow him at times to charge things on that company charge account. Yeah. So these are some of the things that many of a lot of people don't realize, and that's reminiscent of this what do you call it, where this farming, this how with sharecropping. That's what that brings to mind.